I got 50 years of leadership and innovation under his belt, and we're going to jump in and just kind of unpack who he is and what he's all about. I know the story, but you don't know it yet. And rather than me tell you the whole enchilada, why don't we just say, hey, Bob Nuss, good morning, and welcome to Road Gang Radio.
Good morning, Jimmy Mack. How are you? Friday in Minnesota.
What is the weather doing to you up there in Minnesota?
Well, it's supposed to be 50 today, but snowing on Sunday.
Yeah, my mom, who is a lifelong New Orleanian and put up with about 4 years of Virginia weather before saying that's enough, she thinks that what's going to happen here in New Orleans on Monday is cold. It's going to get down to like 43. That's her idea of cold. That's your idea of a great day with a little bit of sunny sky, right?
We'll go golfing at 43 degrees.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Having lived up in the Pacific Northwest, I got to tell you, a day without rain was a day to get out there and get a suntan, even when it was 39 degrees.
Oh, yeah.
Let's talk about you for a second here. I want to give people a sense of the scope of what you have experienced both in your life and the trucking industry. You are born in Rockford, Illinois, right? Can you tell us a little bit about growing up and who you grew up with and the folks that raised you? Because it really informs who you become.
Thank you. I was born in Rockford, 1944. I worked went to high school, graduated from West High School. I grew up, my folks were divorced when I was about 5 years old, so we kind of had split up there for a time. I was living with my mother and my sister. We lived in a housing project and public housing for several years. And in high school, I moved went with my dad, and that gave me a real opportunity as a junior in high school to be. My mother got remarried, moved to Chicago, so I ended up staying there a while. But we came back to Rockford. I did, and that was my first exposure at about 15 years old in a shop. And my dad had rented an office to a guy by the name of Fred Smith, who was the Mack distributor underneath the Chicago branch. And that was common in the old days for these guys to just have an office and be selling trucks. And they'd find somebody else that had a garage and took care of the parts and service. And my dad worked in that same building for 50 years, from 1923 right out of 8th grade. And when he finally retired in 73, that was 50 years. He's been in that building 50 years. He was in that building 50 years, and I've been in this building since 1973, 52 years in Minnesota.
Wow. And to kind of put it in perspective, your pop, Charlie Nuss, was the owner of Mack Rockford, correct?
Mack of Rockford, yeah. Charlie Nuss. It was, he changed the name. It used to be Rockford Mack Distributors. My dad took it over. Mack asked him to change the name, and it became Mack of Rockford. And it was to hear a name with an oven, well, it was about a year later that Peterbilt of Wisconsin started, I guess. And so we must have started a trend, or my dad started a trend in a few other places. But we had a little shop there. Our biggest issue, we were they put bypass 20 around Rockford, so we were in the city 20. The trucks used to drive right by our front door, and we were in the hood. And it was, we got into, Rockford used to be the second largest machine tool center in the world. It's amazing how much industry we had down there. And, but by 2070, I had gone to work during college. I worked summers, except for one summer I worked at the Gunite brake drum factory, which is just reopening now as Rockford Brake Drum. These are the only manufacturer in North America that makes cast iron brake drums. Instead of having to go to Europe or Turkey or China, where they're going to make them back in Rockford again. But I came up here, my dad wanted to retire. After I worked for Valspar out of college from 66 through 69, and with a little stint in the National Guard with active duty, and end of 69, I came back full-time in the truck business as parts manager for that dealership in Rockford. So that's how I got my start. And
yeah, it really is amazing. It really is amazing to me, Bob, because you come back, 15 years old. It's kind of the story of how what has kind of been lost in the last couple of decades here in the country. And by the way, there are people who actually have some strategies to maybe get back to this. You go and you see the stuff up close and personal. You get a sense of what your dad does, but you do a lot of the kind of labor you need to do to understand anything that you might sell or develop or create. And by 69, you're back at Mac of Rockford. And then by 73, you're moving into your own office, right? I mean, that's kind of the trajectory. 4 years later, the game changes for you again, correct?
Yeah, that's right. After being in Rockford until mid 73, my dad wanted to retire, and I said, we've got to move the operation. We're going to go to Minnesota. And I came up here as a general manager of Mack Trucks of Rochester, believe it or not. That was the name of it. And it was a division of a company out of Wisconsin, Mack Lacrosse. I came up here to run it. We had a dozen people. And today we have about 400 people in 10 locations. So it's been a good run, and it's a lot of hard work. There's been ups and downs, just like everybody else in the industry's experienced.
It's interesting to me too, and this is something I'm really fascinated with. When you've lived a good, healthy, productive life, sometimes you live so long that you live long enough to be young again. And you actually have seen that neighborhood and the world that you've existed in go old, sometimes fall apart, but then sometimes, because you have stick-to-itness, you watch them come back together as well. Because one of the things that when you make a commitment to a region or an area and you decide to kind of hold on there, is that you often can find yourself being part of a revival as well. I want to kind of put this in perspective too, because he has guided his company's evolution into the multi-location Nuss Truck Group, Nuss Truck and Equipment, and that's 4 decades. And you guys are now in your 3rd generation. I got that right?
That's right. My sons Greg and Brad Greg is our chief operating officer. My son Brad is our chief financial officer, and my granddaughter Autumn, works in our HR recruiting.
Let me ask you a question too, because as somebody who has been at the head of this for so long, how do you? Because you're a guy who obviously enjoys the time you get to spend with your family, get to enjoy a little bit of downtime as well. But given your own work ethic, how does a person, whether it is their children who are deciding to kind of pick up the business, or whether it is somebody who they are a mentor for, how do you actually balance a world where you're able to stay on the job and keep doing the job and maintain your relevance, but at the same time step back and trust people to run this thing that you've built up over decades? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying, and I think the problem you have, it's a problem with people that have a big ego. Sometimes they want to control everything, and that's the wrong approach. The best way for success is to surround yourself with a lot of great people who have a lot of talent and know more about what they're doing, whether it's parts, service, truck sales, management, financial management, accounting, leasing. I just become a cheerleader. I'm an 80-year-old cheerleader. And what I really love about our business is about 35 years ago, we started collecting these antique trucks just on a whim. We got one, and then we got 2, and then now we've got, I'm looking here at a museum. I'm sitting back here, and there's 60 exhibits in here, 45 trucks, I guess. We squeezed them in here. But we have people from around the world that have come in here, and we set up as we evolved. We set it up as a 501c3 because under the Trump tax laws, if you had done a restoration on an old truck, you had to keep it on your books if it was sold and you spent so much money on it. So we basically donated everything that's here into the foundation. And so we can perpetuate it. And the other thing is we have customers that have donated trucks to the museum, and they're part of the success. So that is really what drives us every day when I get the leads and I go around and give a tour and talk to people. I talked last week, we had Riverland Technical College, diesel tech students, 2-year program. All the 20 plus students were in here, and to talk about Building America, which is the theme of our museum, and the evolution of trucking and just the technology. And when you look at these, like I'm sitting right in front of a 1912 Mack Junior, which is with the engine that's in there, this little 30-horse engine, it probably weighs 900 pounds. It's one of 4 engines like this in North America. That's a rare truck. We've got a Hoover Dam truck in here that's one of 17 trucks in 1933 that went on the Hoover Dam project. This is the only one in the world that's been restored. We've got the first CJ Mack it's the first production truck with a bulldog on it.
This is, by the way, I want to kind of give people a sense of what we've been kind of setting up here. And Bob, thank you so much, by the way, for actually knowing where I was going by going back to the beginning of this entire story. Along with being the 2017 American Truck Dealer of the Year and the 2023 ATHS Golden Achievement Award honoree, a lot of that is the fact of exactly what he's talking about, which is the Nuss Collection Truck Museum, which is what he's talking about right now. It is the home to over 60 antique trucks that celebrate the history and the people who built the industry. So you can see why Bob is so deeply involved as a life member of the ATHS. I wanted to ask you a question about all that remarkable equipment that's in front of you. And by the way, one of our listeners on the chat points out that his folks over at Halvor buy their stuff from you. But I wanted to tell you really quickly and ask you this question as well. When you go about the business of putting together a museum like this, when you first started, was it just like this would be fun to do this couple of trucks here and see where it goes? Or did you begin with the intention of actually having a museum at the end of this whole project? Or did you see that develop in front of you? Because there are 2 ways things happen. They either happen gradually and then all of a sudden, or all of a sudden and then gradually, if you get my drift.
I get exactly where you're going, and it actually started out as, well, let's just have a couple trucks. And you know, we might put one in a lobby at one of our buildings. In fact, we did in St. Cloud when we built that new dealership. We had one of the trucks in there. We rotated it out every few months, and the rest were in a shop that we rented some storage, and then we ended up acquiring this building, which is where our corporate office is. It used to be it was built in the 70s, and it was a GMC dealership. We acquired it from one of the original founders of that dealership, and we did a total restoration. We gutted the building down to the red iron and the concrete and totally refitted it, and all new, widened the garage doors. All the doors in the museum have got old Mack photographs on them. They're bus wraps, so there's like 20 doors in the museum. So we have a booklet called the Historic Doors of the Nuss Collection. And people come in just to see the doors. They're all black and white photos. And, you know, on a bus wrap, you can put them on the outside of a bus. They'll last 8 or 9 years, 10 years. On the inside of an insulated door, they'll last a long time till somebody, you know, the door falls down or somebody accidentally drives through it. Hopefully we don't have that happen. But knock on wood, I got to find some wood. I better hit my head here.
No, you're going to be fine. Actually, we got wood over here. I immediately hit the wood and took care of it. I got you covered, Bob. The other thing that I wanted to ask you really quickly was, so you answered the question very, very well. Was there an aha moment? You kind of alluded to one maybe. That's why I said, we just have a couple of trucks, and you know, this would be nice, and maybe some of them we can show off and have a conversation piece, have a project that brings everybody together, use some downtime in a productive way. But was there a moment, because we've had this happen over here in Nemo Land, where you're doing one thing for fun, but also because it keeps you stimulated, and then you look at the people you're with and you kind of go, I think we're up to something bigger, and maybe we should sit down and figure this out. Maybe now we should come up with a game plan. Was there a moment where you or the people you work with said, maybe we should actually call a meeting?
Yeah, and there was. And basically my son Greg has been more instrumental with pushing. He loves the history. Of course, he grew up at a much younger age than when I started. You know, it was like bringing these kids out to the museum or bringing them out on a truck delivery when they're right out of diapers. That's when I told my wife, I said, the boys can come with when they're out of diapers. I'm not going to change diapers in a truck, although Greg had we took a fire truck. My dad used to, here's something that really kind of in the back of our minds, my dad used to love to work on fire trucks. He always wanted to be a fireman, but he was too short. But what he did was he found an opportunity with old fire trucks, like old Seagrave fire trucks that had gas engines, and he figured out how to repower them with brand new Mack diesels and create a new life of another 20-year certification for these trucks. In these small towns that couldn't afford a new fire truck, to go to Charlie Nuss in Rockford and get their truck repowered, and he did this at the city of Rockford. For several trucks, he did it. Freeport, Marengo, Waukegan, Illinois, and the Waukegan fire chief, that got a little squirrely because the fire chief wanted a bribe. And I could tell you this, well, the job was $12,000 to convert a hook and ladder truck to put a brand new ENDT 673F engine right out of a Mack diesel, but the fire truck engine's painted red, got chrome valve covers, and they were set for 2,200 RPM instead of 2,100. And because they used intermittent power, and it just worked wonderful. But my first experience with that fire chief came in and wanted my dad to pay him $400. He wanted him to buy 200 tickets to the Fireman's Ball in Waukegan. And you've never heard of when I went to college, they never had any classes about the experience you might enjoy of having a public official trying to solicit a bribe. You'd think it would be the other way around. They would caution you not to bribe a public official, but you got the public official bribing you, or asking you for a bribe. And the guy said he wouldn't pay the bill unless you bought these tickets. And boy, my dad he was excited. He was upset, and he reluctantly gave the chief $400. And of course, after we got paid in full, he turned him into the guy ended up going to jail because he was doing this to every supplier. You know the people that do this stuff. The spots of a leopard never change.
Okay. By the way, Bob, I wanted to tell you something really funny. There was a civil sheriff in the city of New Orleans named Milt Steyer, and they called him the Snake. And every year he would have this big raffle for a Cadillac, a new Cadillac. And every year one of the employees in his office would win it.
Oh.
And one of the funniest things about it was one year the employee actually thought he had a right to the Cadillac and sent out a press release announcing how proud he and his wife were to be the owners of the new Cadillac. Milt almost hit the ceiling. This kind of stuff back in the day inside of what I would call mid-sized cities and thriving, trifecta cities and all that kind of stuff was like part of the operation. And it's good for you, Dan, by the way, for making a stand. I wanted to ask you this question because, and we'll get to the ATHS here and your relationship with them in just a moment, but you stand, are you aware of the fact that you are basically now at a summit point where you can see back to your dad, and if you turn in the other direction, you can see Greg and Brad? Does that ever fill you with wonder, and knowing that over at Human Resources, a granddaughter of yours sits, does that ever fill you with a moment of awe? The idea that you stand in the middle of a giant continuum of trucking history.
Well, it does. I do get, you get a vision. You look back, and then you look into the future, and you want to talk to the future. Like when you have these students come in here, and you're basically talking to the future, and I can talk. I remember when I worked with my dad, sometimes we'd argue about a stoplight being red. But when I look back, he was right most all the time. He was a little stubborn. He only had an 8th grade education, but he was smarter as a whip. And, he could go out and when he figured out how to do these fire trucks, that was a big deal. When one of the projects that we did after we did the city of Marengo, the Mack folks got really excited about it. And I'm in college, and I'm looking, They said, could you guys write a little letter or story about this whole project with you repowering these C-grade fire trucks with Mack diesels? And I came up, I said, my dad says, well, you'll have to do it. You're going to college, you can do that. So I wrote this article up and took a couple pictures, and I came up with a headline for the article: Heart Transplant Revives Fire Truck. And you remember when Dr. Christian Barnard in South Africa did the first heart transplant? That's what gave me the idea that we are basically putting new life into old trucks and perpetuating their existence for another 20 to 30 years. And how innovative, while simple, it served a purpose, and communities that couldn't afford a new truck, basically they got their truck back on the road for, well, typically just doing an engine was like $8,000. If you did the hook and ladder truck, we put air brakes on a complete tiller and the whole truck took the hydraulic brakes off, put air brakes on it. That's innovation. And we've continued. We've done a lot of innovations in our dealerships up here. I mean, we've done some crazy things. We put air right underneath the front of superliners. We did several of them over the years. We took a tandem axle with a pusher axle on a superliner for a company out of Chicago, and we certified the truck for California legal, because you can't have a pusher axle in California that lifts. We took the lift off, and you have to run it up on a ramp and put chains up underneath. Well, the chain is actually, you pull a little deck plate off and you can raise the chain there, and you drive it up on the ramps and hook it up. But basically we used little aluminum, like real thin pancakes, to level out so we could have 20, 20, and 20 on all three axles. And California certified it as California legal. A truck done in Minnesota. It was very innovative.
Is anybody surprised that this man sits at the center of what is right and what is vibrant about the ATHS? Press this on Road Gang Radio this morning. By the way, can we talk a little bit about, in the brief time that we have left, your relationship with ATHS and why you think it is such an important institution in regards to that it stands in much of the same place that you stand. Sharp as a tack, with the ability to look forward and look behind. Talk a little bit about your relationship with them.
I've been involved with ATHS for many years, and I remember when we had the show, their show was in Minneapolis at the Radisson South, 30 years ago. And we took a full page ad out. I went to the Mack marketing people. I said, this show is up here in our town. We've got to support this up here. And we came up with an ad and basically endorsing ATHS on the promotion and preservation of old trucks in America. And it's just, it says it all, because basically all of us are part of history. It doesn't matter what kind of brand or truck or engine you were affiliated with or you grew up around. All these trucks did a job. And if you look back at the history, we put together a video for our museum that was professionally done that tells a lot about the history, and it's a little 6-minute video. It's on YouTube. We support the local chapter, which is the Hiawatha Land chapter here in southeastern Minnesota, western Wisconsin, and northeastern Iowa. Every year when we hold an annual open house here at the museum in September, and then the chapter has a chapter meeting here, and we use the facility, and it's just a unique opportunity for us to support. When I first did it, some of the guys were a little, well, gee, you're a Mack guy or whatever. Yeah, we're Mack, and we've got Mack and Volvo, but we've got Peterbilt's in here. There's an international in the museum. In fact, we had 2 internationals. 2 different companies gave us internationals. But all of it's part of the history. You got to keep in mind when you're going back in the 20s and 30s that Mack had about 40% market share in the 20s and 30s. They were big in the industry. There wasn't a Kenworth or Peterbilt. Freightliner, you remember when Freightliner was built by Consolidated Freightways? and they sold them through the White Motor Company. And then they became, they called them White Freightliners. And then later on, after White went broke, after, of course, when Volvo bought the remnants of White, they didn't keep Freightliner, and Freightliner ended up being bought by the Germans, but Mercedes. But there's a lot of history and a lot of movement and a lot of changes, evolution. But I think we all in this industry like to hold on to the past, and when I see these young kids that come in the museum and they embrace the history and look at it, you know, no power steering, no front brakes, no enclosed cabs, no air ride seat. Look at what these guys and gals that drove these things went through to deliver the goods to America. And it's really, it's a fun deal. And we had an opportunity to have when we hosted President Trump in 2019 at our Burnsville store, we had a new Mack truck and a new Volvo loader behind where he was sitting. And as I introduced him, I turned back to the equipment and I said, "Mr. President, welcome to on behalf of our employees and our family. But what a better setting to have than a new loader and a new Mack truck." I said, these represent the business tools that build and move America forward.
Bob, I got to cut it short. Can you believe how fast this went? I can't believe how quick we actually got through all this, and we still have so much more on the table. Promise me that you'll find time to come back. What an honor to be able to sit there knowing that the President of the United States is watching you take your company, your love of trucking, and your love of the history of trucking into the 21st century. Thank you so much, my friend. You are welcome back anytime, okay?
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
I did too.
Let me know when.
I got to take a quick break.